Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Sofia Speaks for Ask an Educator. Sofia Speaks edition with Latinx Education Collaborative. Happy Thursday. We are in the house, and listen, I'm just so excited about our next guest. I cannot begin to explain. So I really just wanted to just give like a brief overview of like why I'm connected here, what's happening, and some themes that are going on throughout each episode. So first and foremost, the LEC and I are a family. We are a familia. I have been doing some work with the LEC family for a while now, former keynote speaker to one of their incredible conferences in KC, also a former fellow with Storytellers for Change. Just an incredible fellowship that really changed the course of my life in terms of how I tell my story at the intersection of social change. So we just felt like, hey, let's just continue to collaborate. The LEC family is paramount for amplifying the Latinx voice in the KC area, but also around the nation in the K through 12 space. And I'm just so grateful that I get a seat at the table. I'm just so grateful that I get the mic. So our last two episodes really highlighted early career teachers. And I had the privilege and the honor of taking it to my home turf, Morton East in the Chicagoland area. And we were able to speak to two incredible teachers in their first 5 years. And so now I want to pivot and I really want to highlight teachers that are in the third largest school district in our nation. You guessed it, the Chicago public school system. And so up next is a Chicago public school teacher, bilingual teacher, working in the neighborhood with the babies. She is also in her first 5 years, and she is not only what I call a colleague of mine, right? Any teacher to me is a colleague. We are in the trenches together, but she is also my sister-in-law. And so you'll catch the vibes, you'll catch the chemistry of how well we know one another and how much we care for each other. But without further ado, I would like to welcome our current guest on the Sofia Speaks edition of Ask an Educator. Miss Eunice Rodriguez is in the house. How are you, sis?
I am great. I'm a little nervous because in the family, Sofia, she's definitely the the public speaker. But no, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to share my story and speak education, bilingual education, culturally responsive teaching, all that good stuff with everyone out there today.
And we're just so excited to have you, sis. We could just breathe deep. We could just have a conversation, literally, like how we've been having a conversation for like the past 15 years, pretty
Oh yeah,
much, basically.
absolutely.
So it's just an honor that we both meet at the intersection of the world of education. And we're just so excited to have you here. But I could go on and tell the whole world your life story and your journey, but
Know
let's
it
hear from
well.
you. Know it well, as you know mine. But tell us about yourself, like where you're from, your people, your cultura. Who is Eunice?
Yeah, so I could get a little long-winded with my story, so I will try to keep it short. But my family is from El Salvador. So I grew up in a Spanish-speaking household. So Spanish was my first language. Came into learning English at school. So that's my early days, right? And so we grew up in Humboldt Park, northwest side of Chicago. I was a CPS student. I am now a CPS teacher. So I am all CPS through and through. So yeah, I grew up in a Pentecostal household. My parents were pastors. I have that whole background. But as far as education, I am Chicago all the way. I went to Wright College, which is one of the city colleges of Chicago. I got my associate's degree from there. Sofia has stories of me with my belly doing my homework. So my story is not a traditional story. So my education, it took me a while. I started off at city colleges. Then once I decided to go back to school and get my bachelor's, I was married by that time. I had kids, so I did online school. I was a sociology major. And that's when I kind of stepped into the world of the nonprofit social service agency world at Erie Neighborhood House. So shout out to Erie Neighborhood House. They are doing some amazing things for the people of Chicago. And there I worked closely with the undocumented community, with the immigrant community. I particularly worked in the housing department. And at the time, they had a contract with the Chicago Housing Authority. So we would work closely with housing choice voucher tenants, housing choice voucher landlords. We kind of served as a liaison between the two. And particularly, we would work with the Spanish speaking community because, as we know, not everything is translated. They don't always have a Spanish speaker on the other line of the phone when you're trying to make a phone call about certain things. So we kind of served as like that third party. And then from there, just branched off into getting into housing rights. And because we would work a lot with tenants that were just being mistreated and abused. You know, sometimes when you don't know the language, if a landlord happens to know that you are undocumented, they kind of abuse of that, right? Oftentimes. And so we would let tenants know about their rights. We would give, especially when Trump became president, there was this big fear in the undocumented community of what's going to happen. Is he really going to hold true to this promise and deport everybody? And so we did, I was lucky enough to be a part of a program that educated the undocumented community on their rights, right? And what to do and what not to do if ICE happens to show up at your door, what a legal warrant looks like. So it was just this whole realm of this world where I did work closely with the undocumented community. And and being of a family of immigrants, I fell in love with that, you know, and I fell in love with servicing them because they need people that speak the language, but they also need people on their side that have the heart to serve them. And so just personally at the time, that's when I became pregnant with my third little guy, my third son, Aaron. And so just personally, right, I was in this moment where I was like, you know what? He's our third. He's our last. Absolutely not having any more after this. I'm going to stay home for a year. I want to spend time with him. And I stopped working at Erie Neighborhood House. And once that year was up, you know, I expressed to my family, to my kids, to my husband that I really wanted to go back to school. I wanted to get my master's. And so I was faced with that question, do I go back into social work? I loved what I was doing, but I always had this heart to teach. Like I always had this heart to be in education. And even in high school, you know how they have that little, tell us about yourself with your, you know, your graduation photo. I put future goals that I wanted to be a teacher. So I remember that. Yeah. And so as we were having this conversation and I was thinking like, what do I want to do? You know, what's the next step? My husband happened to stumble upon a promotion on Facebook for the CPS teacher residency program. And prior to that, they only had 1 year prior. So I actually came in on the second year. So I was still one of the newbies in that program. I said, heck, let me try this out. So I applied. That's a whole other story. Sofia, you were there, just how like everything kind of fell into place. And it was so surreal. And I got into the program. I was a part of the cohort for 2019, 2020. And I did a year. You're a year working alongside CPS. They hook you up with a mentor at a CPS school. I had an amazing mentor, Oscar Guillen, OG. I give him a huge shout out. He was yes, absolutely. He was an amazing mentor. And so you are with this mentor for a year. And it's not typical student teaching. You're in school while you are also in the classroom, and it's called a gradual release. You start off little by little, right? In the beginning, you're just kind of taking notes, observing your mentor teacher. Then from there, they'll give you a task or two. I started off doing our morning meeting. So that was my introduction into education. And then because I was a teacher resident for sixth grade, we were departmentalized. So he would it started off where, okay, I'm going to teach one lesson to one of the classes, and then from there it's like, okay, well, I'll teach two lessons 2 times a week, and then from there toward the end of the year, it's released to you, and I had full power over my class, which funny enough was during the pandemic, which was a whole other thing. Our residency got interrupted during the pandemic, so I took over my classroom virtually. So, and I was a first year teacher virtual, so that's a funny thing about my story. So yeah, I know I said I could get a little long-winded, so I tried to cut it short, but
no. Thank you for giving us like the background. Oh, we have Miss Miranda Erica here saying, let's go.
Yes.
My next
Love
guest.
her. Love her. Bilingual education. Oh, gee, funny story. It's a connection, right? He was my mentor, and he's now her principal. So that's pretty dope.
Yes, and we also have Delia here, a good friend of ours. Hey, Kelvin Park, class of 1998. A good friend of mine, and she is a great supporter. So you kind of organically went into your journey from the nonprofit space into the world of EDU, and you and I share that similar story, where I started out in the nonprofit world, and then I easily transitioned into the world of education, because nonprofit work and working as a teacher really have a lot of similarities that kind of cross over. You're advocating, teaching is a version of resistance. It's a form of activism. You are really speaking for the needs of those you are serving. And in our case, it's our students and families. And so I just love how all those pieces kind of fell into play for you, and you were already being prepared. Like, you are a Latina, you're a daughter of immigrants, you are bilingual, you were already advocating for needs, but in the housing, realm. And now you're transitioning into the classroom, and you are Chi-Town all day, right?
And every day.
Okay, all day, every day. So let's let the people know. Let's let them know, because this is a national podcast. So not everybody really. Thank you, Martin, coming in here talking about great story. We appreciate these comments. Keep them through. Oh, and we have Mr. Rodriguez in here. Husband, my brother-in-law, ladies and gentlemen.
That's right.
My light bulbs and help me figure out my bright lights in my car. I mean, we got history, okay, y'all?
Oh yeah.
And I would agree. Eunice is amazing. Glad I can catch this episode. Thank you for joining us, everybody in this space. We are just so glad that you are here. But I really, Eunice, I really want us to have a candid conversation about what it is to be a teacher in the Chicago Public Schools. Right now, we are the third largest district in the United States, next to New York and some others. And there are so many dynamics that go into working CPS. I work CPS my first 5 years, and then now I'm in my home district. I'm in the Chicagoland area. I'm just outside of the city of Chicago. I still consider myself a champion for urban education. But talk to us, right? Talk to us, like, what are some of the challenges? First of all, tell us your role. Tell us where you teach. Tell us what you teach. And then tell us, some of the challenges that you and your students are facing and have faced.
Yeah, definitely. So I am a middle school teacher. I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade language arts. I'm an ELA teacher. I'm also a bilingual teacher. I have an ESL endorsement. So a large majority of my students are English language learners. I teach at Richard J. Daly Academy in Back of the Yards, Brighton Park. So that is the neighborhood I am teaching in. Yeah, and this is my third year teaching. Technically, it's my fourth because my first year I was a part of the teacher residency program, and I was a teacher resident and I was in the classroom. But officially, as a teacher, certified teacher, I am in my third year of teaching right now.
Good. Thank you for that background and for that context. And for those of you who don't live near the city of Chicago, are not in the state of Illinois, where she's at, Back of the Yards, is
I
a
mean,
pretty intense.
yeah.
It's a pretty intense neighborhood. I mean, you are in the crosshairs of rival gang territory. Um, Back of the Yards is also known as a food desert, where there is not fair access or easy access to quality
Mhm.
produce and quality food products. Yes, they have the local neighborhood, corner store and marts that are, food marts that are erupting throughout the neighborhood. But obviously, we know that they could use like more, quality products. And there's just a lot going on. You serve, specifically, students of color, and
Mhm.
you are really working with language learners and what that
Mhm.
looks like. But talk to us about some of those issues, right? That we know and that we're going to keep pushing to the forefront,
Yeah.
right? Like things like immigration, like poverty,
Mhm.
like
Right.
resources, like going through. And you and I, man, we've exchanged war stories of
Yeah.
vicarious trauma and what it is. And you've
Mhm.
already expressed that you have what we know as compassion fatigue, where you
Yeah.
get involved so deeply in the lives of your students and their
Mhm.
families that you are literally vicariously experiencing some of the traumas that your students have gone through.
Right.
Tell us
Right.
about some of these.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Back of the Yards, it is a low-income neighborhood where, yes, gang activity is very prominent. It reminds me of at the beginning of this year, when as teachers, we always like to start off the year just getting to know our students, right? Building a culture of, respect and rapport, and just, building our classroom environment, our classroom culture. And so an activity that I do with them is they do an identity map. And in the identity map, you create a poem from the identity map, and it has
Okay.
different aspects to it. So one of them is what you see, and
Mm,
it focuses on your neighborhood as well, right? So you write what you see, what you hear, what you smell, right? So a lot of them say, they hear, the paletero in the neighborhood, or the elote man.
right.
But a lot of them mention how they hear gunshots. They hear
Mm,
gunshots at night, and I would tell you maybe over 50%, 60% of my students that we're working on this identity map mention the hearing of gunshots, right? And so that's their day to day. And
wow.
they almost said it so casually, like, yeah, that's what we hear. And they even asked me, is it okay if I write some? I'm like, absolutely. This is your identity map. This is, we're talking about your neighborhood and who you are.
Right.
And so that's something that we face every day, in our neighborhoods. And so some of the challenges is that, I mean, middle school in itself is a very interesting age group, a challenge in itself, right? But I love teaching middle school because they're in this stage in their life right now where it's like they're discovering like who they are, and who they
Mm,
want to be. But then they're also facing the challenges of, like, it's still very prominent today, right? Peer pressure, and which way do I go? What do I do?
sure.
And so teaching middle schoolers, particularly my middle schoolers, they're not, they're going through the typical, who am I? Who do I want to be? But also they're going through different traumas in their lives that,
Absolutely.
it's, you just sit back and you think about it, and you're like, just how could they,
Yeah.
show up to school every day. I have students that have lost loved ones, have lost siblings to gun violence, to gang violence, have lost cousins. I have students that their parents are in and out of jail and are being raised by their grandparents, right? And
Right.
so they come to school with this every single day, right? It's this battle where, you know, they want to learn, they want, you know, they're trying just to learn basic skills sometimes, right? Reading, writing, math, like, but then they have these things that are happening at home that are just affecting them emotionally. And you know, how do they navigate through that? And just us as teachers as well, right? How do we
Right.
navigate through that? We need to meet them where they're at. And so I have my students where it's like, okay, where are they at today, right? I kind of have to gauge them and see what's the
Right.
expression of her face, what's his body language,
Yeah.
um, because I don't know if it's going to be a good day. I don't know if it's going to be a bad day. I don't know if
Wow.
something that is said
Yeah.
in class or something that is even taught in class might trigger
Yep.
them, might spark up some
Yep.
type of emotions in them. I have all across the board students that have gone through similar stories, have lost loved ones. Some are very angry, have
Wow.
outbursts, right?
Right.
Others are more reserved and they've kind of just
Right.
like closed people off. And so again, middle school, all sorts of variety of personalities, but then throw in these real life trauma issues, just heartbreak, right? And they're living through that on a day to day. And here I am trying to get them to read a passage and find the central idea, you
Right.
know, when they're dealing with this. So I think definitely that that's one of the greatest challenges that we face. You know,
Yeah.
and we have mentioned the immigrant community, the undocumented community. Many of my students are, you know, fresh, just coming from other countries, and so they're having to learn the language, they're having to learn a new culture, adapt to a new city, a new
Right.
environment, um, try to make friends. You know, it's just so much that, you know, they're little people that are just trying to live. And so us as teachers, right, we take on a great task of, again, right, getting them up, you know, up to the standard, or teaching them, you know, what common core standard am I teaching today, what's the objective, when they're going through this personally. So I think that that is definitely the greatest challenge that we're facing right now. And
Absolutely. Yeah, and like just to emphasize this idea, like for those of us who are in urban education, we don't have a choice to choose whether or not we want to engage the whole child or consider the whole child. We don't have an
Mhm.
option whether or not we want to consider social emotional learning. We do
Yeah.
not have a choice when it comes to really creating opportunities for cultural relevance, for them
Mhm.
to really see themselves in the curriculum that we teach. I mean, we are out of options otherwise.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
paramount for us to really connect with where they're at and to really consider that we need to throw our lesson out the window. If that means that,
Right.
you know, our students were part of a traumatic event the night before or are still working through mental health issues, that their environment is infringing on them, that their
Mhm.
home life is infringing on them. And let's just say this, like, this is something that I also feel like we are responsible for as women of color, as educators of color, as Latinas, you know, working in these districts and working with these incredible students and families, is that we need to change the narrative, and just
Mhm.
really also highlight, tell me your kids are not resilient. Tell me
Yeah.
that at the end of the school year, knowing some of their life stories, knowing that one of your students, and you told me recently, as early as last night, lost his twin brother to gun violence in his arms, and that
Yeah.
child was still showing up to your class,
Yeah. Yeah.
participating, learning, trying to figure out how he could pass his class and how he could, you
Right.
know, part of
Right.
his learning, and his school year. They
Right.
are resilient. They are they are fighters, and they're not
Yeah.
just survivors, but many of them end up thriving. And it is in these circumstances that a lot of our students within the Chicago public school system are engaging, and what they have to circumnavigate, right? And I
Mhm.
think these are important points that we need to continue to push at the forefront, and also to consider the teachers and staff that are in the trenches, that are in the front lines, and that are working with these students and families day to day. I
Yep.
mean, urban education, it is not for the faint at heart. I mean, honestly, like honestly,
Uh-huh.
um, it is super intense. Oh, I have my former student here, Destiny, talking about, hey,
Hey.
girl. And
Hey.
they come back. Like your students come back to you, Miss Rodriguez, and they show you some love. And I know one of your students came back to you. Many of your students have come back to you to express their love and affection for you. We have Daniel Gonzalez here. Hey, I believe, is that our nephew? It's the
I think
teacher
so.
that cares to have these
Oh,
conversations.
it's
Oh, it's
Christine. It's
Christine, it's wife, by the
Christine.
way.
Aw, so
Yeah,
sweet.
okay.
Thank you.
So, yeah, like that's one of our family members, Christine. Shout out. It's the teachers that care to have these conversations, and CPS that made a difference. So, thank you both for loving your students so well. I know it can't be easy. BTW, love you, ladies. We
We
love
love you
you too.
too.
Thank you for chiming in. Yes, I gotta say, we are some of the real ones. Okay, we are some of the Jews. All right. But quickly, I mean, like, let's talk to the people. There
Yeah.
are some challenges, but what are some benefits of working in the Chicago public school system? Let's let the people know here.
As I had mentioned earlier, I was very fortunate to be a part of the teacher residency program. And so I think that that was a huge benefit for me personally, right? Because when I came into this, I had a ton of support. I had an amazing mentor. We had different supports at CPS. We had someone that actually helped us apply to schools, and that was like solely their job, was helping us build our resume. And so even throughout, I'm third year in, they still check up on us. They have office hours for us in case we have, any questions or we come across anything. So being a part of that program, I did feel very supported. I felt
Good.
super supported. I did feel like I had help, and then as a first year teacher, they still hooked us up with a coach. She would come in and observe me, and she would help guide me. And so a lot of the classroom routine that I have set in place was kind of just a combination of, organic flow, obviously, and like what I felt worked well for me, but also just like the help of my mentor and my coach, and just kind of combining forces. And because as teachers, like all that stuff is so important, right? Your routines that you set in place,
Yeah,
and because classroom
absolutely.
management, like it's, as we know, it's not just walking in there and saying, hey, this is the work that we're going to do. There's just so many components that go into it, to let the classroom flow, the way it does. And so I felt super fortunate. I'm blessed in that sense. I'm also a part of the Chicago Teachers Union. They
Yeah.
are a powerful force. As a teacher resident, we actually, CPS, they were going through a strike in the middle of our residency. And
Yep.
so they told us, as resident teachers, you have the power to support your teachers if you, in solidarity, want to go on strike with them. Obviously, we still have to go to our courses at school. But if
Right.
we decided to not go into work and to march with them, protest with them, we were given that choice. Or for those that said, you know what, I'm still going to go in, because we had a stipend through the program, and so they stopped the stipend. They said we also have to be fair, right? If you're not going to go into work, but we weren't going to get fired or kicked out of the program. So in
Right.
that sense, I have felt super supported. I was aware, I was a part of. I did choose to, in solidarity, to go on strike with my mentor teacher and my fellow colleagues, a group of
Good.
us, decided to do so. As a first year teacher, we also
I'm
went,
serious. And I remember you asking me my advice. You're like, sis, should I strike? I'm like, girl,
right,
listen,
because you're
be
so like,
in military.
what is this world, right? And so, but you just feel so empowered,
Yeah, I love that.
you begin to realize like this is a power that we have.
Yeah.
And being a part of a strong union,
It is probably one of the
this is
strongest
what we
unions.
yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's one of the strongest, if not maybe the strongest, in my opinion, right? And so just to support along the way, and knowing that you have this backing behind you, and no, things are not perfect, right? There's so that's a whole conversation that we can have, and we might even touch on it today. Is sometimes there isn't always support, right? There's sometimes is
Right.
a lack of support, a lack of resources, a lack of
Resources.
staff. My school currently, we're understaffed right now, and so that's when I gave my intro. I said, well, now I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, because I started off as just 7th and 8th, but because we have a shortage of teachers, we were asked as middle school to take on teaching all three. So those are realities that we face, right?
Right.
But it's a beautiful thing to know that you have the backing of a strong union, that will go to bat for you. So that is definitely an advantage that I feel being a part of CPS, because I am on teacher TikTok. I love me some teacher TikTok.
Yes.
And you mentioned this is national, so I am aware that here at CPS, that is an advantage that I have, being a Chicago public school teacher, being a part of the
Right.
CTU. That is an advantage that I have, and a privilege, because not all states, not all cities have that, right? Not
Right.
cities. I mean, I begin to think about what's happening, in other states where they're banning books. As an ELA teacher, and a teacher that is my jam, is just
Right.
culturally responsive teaching, having literature in front of students that they can connect to, that speaks
Come
on their
on.
culture, their environment, their neighborhoods, their upbringings, being
Yes.
able to see themselves in these books. That breaks my heart to know that in some states in our country today, in 2023, they have to put a ban on their books, and look through their libraries, and check off a list and say, oh no, this one, I can't have this book on here. That's heartbreaking. So I
Yeah.
recognize, the advantage and the privilege that I have as, being a Chicago public school teacher, and being a part of the CTU. I'm very fortunate in that
Yeah,
sense.
absolutely. And it goes without saying, as a former Chicago public school teacher myself, stakes are very high.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
union support needs to be high too.
Oh yeah.
And the work that we do, we gonna say it, Miss Miranda, as the comments keep flowing
That's
in.
right.
Please
Hmm.
come on and join the conversation. The work that we do, man, it's not just the difference between academic success and failure, but it can be the difference between life and death,
Oh yeah.
between
Oh
us
yeah.
disrupting the school to prison pipeline. Come on,
Right.
somebody.
Oh
Um,
yeah. That's right.
between them being sucked into the street life and the drug
Mhm.
life and the nightlife and all of those different consequences that would go with many of our students that are already vulnerable and on the margins. And what we do is not just teaching to Common Core standards. It's not just teaching to the curriculum, but it is actually, teaching life to them. I know that you have
Oh yeah.
had
Oh
many
yeah.
conversations with your students that you've told me over dinner were like, man, sis, like, I just had to like teach life to these kids and just be like,
Yeah.
listen,
Yeah.
man, the choices that you make can dictate your tomorrow. And I'm here to let you know that I'm in your corner. You've got me. You have got me. I am more than just your teacher. And for many of your students, that has made the difference. I definitely want to circle back, and not that we need to name names or anything, but I know that you had a student that was in a lot of distress. Um,
Hmm.
I know that you had a particular student that was labeled with a lot of labels, ED and a whole bunch of other labels. And, this particular student was really wrapped up in some really dangerous things. And I don't know if the student got kicked out for a while, and
Yeah,
then
we
came
did.
back,
And we came
and
back.
and and this student really gave you a hard time. This student did not make it easy for you. And don't you love it?
Oh, no, no, no.
That, like, those are the ones that you're like, why do you hate me? Like, why? Please tell me why you hate me. And then they come back and they're like, man, I just love you.
Oh
Man, can
yeah.
I
Oh
tell us
yeah.
about it?
Let me
Tell
tell
us
you about
about it.
that. So this student of mine, I had her 2 years since I teach middle school. I was able to have her for seventh and eighth grade. And so we knew last year we were aware of just personal things that were happening in her life. So her father was in and out of jail, and so she was wrapped up in that life, right? So came from a family of drug dealers and gang members, and so as an impressionable child, right,
Seventh
I
grade?
feel like it's almost like that's the life she knows, right? So it's like, well, this is who I am, and this is the road that I'm gonna go down. And so there was that, but then at the same time, she's so brilliant. Like
Yeah.
she was
Aren't they
such
though?
she is such a great writer. And we do a lot of journaling in my class. And so I would just read her journal. And sometimes it was just kind of like a free write where you can write poetry, you can write a letter, you can write an essay, whatever, just speak your heart. And I would give them kind of, we have essential questions every quarter. And so like one of our essential questions was, what is truth? Right. And so you just kind of write on that. And so the things that she would write about, and she would just write about them, just, you could tell she was in it. And sometimes we would move past the exercise and we would move on to the next thing of class, but I that next part of class, but I would just see her so just taken over, right, by her writing, right? I'm just like, all right, she's in her groove right now, just let her be. And so little by little, through that, just through like me, and she would be so surprised. She's like, Miss Rodriguez, you actually read the journal, you're not just checking them off. And I'm like, no, I'm
Wow.
interested, I want to know what you're writing about. I give these writing
Yeah.
prompts for a reason. And I would tell them too, if something makes you uncomfortable and you don't want me to read it, by all means, I do want to respect that, because as a teacher, I'm like, I just want you to write. I just want you to get used to putting your thoughts on paper or typing them out, whatever works best for you. And so through that, her and I, we kind of built a bond,
A
and so I
bond.
would share personal stories with her of, things that I had gone through in my life that were similar, right? And
Yeah.
so losing family members, right? I lost my father when I was a teenager. So I would share that with her. And so even just knowing what she's feeling, right? Knowing that although her father didn't pass away, but he was in and out of her life.
Yeah.
And just knowing that. And so we had a really strong connection. However, one time, a few times actually, but there was one time I remember, we had an assignment where she had to write a letter to the author of the novel. And of course, it's still a classroom, right? So I do have my free writes where it's just like, just write for your heart. But then we also have learning tasks. We have assignments where, hey, this is the rubric. This
Right.
is, what the standard, the objective. This is what we got to do. These are the steps. And so she was really frustrated by that because it was a letter. And she's like, why? And she literally got up in the middle of class and she's like, why do I have to go through all this? It's just a letter. It's just a beep letter, right? And so I said, okay, I hear you. I said, let's, take a breather and we'll talk about it, right? Because in that moment too, it's like, okay, I have other students. I can't just drop everything I'm doing as well, but I want to address her. I don't want to leave her hanging. So even that, right? It's like, how do we navigate these moments
Right.
in class where we have an outburst, but we have a room full of students that are like really into the assignment? And so I acknowledged her. I told her, I said, I'm going to get back to you. Just, we'll figure this out. So I spoke to her after class And she was just not herself with me, because by that time we had already built like a pretty strong relationship, and I'm like, man, what's
Yeah.
going on here?
Yeah.
So I ended up reaching out to the school counselor and the school social worker at that time, and I said, hey, like, there's something going on here. She had a huge outburst in my class.
Mm.
I feel like this needs to be addressed. So
Yeah.
we ended up having a peace circle. And in the peace circle, it came out that she would have to write letters to her dad in prison. And so
Wow.
writing that letter and just having to be like, oh, you have to follow this guideline and that
Mm.
guideline. Like, it was just so
Triggered.
threatening to her. Yeah.
Triggered.
And that was one of my first experiences as a teacher. That was my second year of
Mm.
teaching, where I realized, I said, you know what? I also have to be so sensitive to that as well, and know what can and cannot, trigger my students, or have them just
Wow.
kind of get into a place where they just shut down or they
Mm.
react. And being aware of these things. So I was grateful that we had that conversation. But unfortunately, it didn't end there. She went through a lot more other things that just really affected her. This year, she lost her cousin, to violence, to gang violence, and her cousin was like a brother to her, because the grandmother was raising them together. And
Oh man.
so she would call him her brother. And so when this happened, by that time, actually prior to this, she had already gotten kicked out of the school, because unfortunately it was happening a lot, and there's only so much we can do. And I remember the day that she left, I came back because I had surgery. I had gallbladder surgery. That's a probably TMI, sorry about that. But and so
All
and
good.
so it happens, right? we,
Great.
we are human beings. And so I came back. I was off of school for a week, and so when I came back, that's when she was gone, and they told me, she's no longer here. She got into it pretty horribly with someone in administration, and so they kicked her out. And so I was heartbroken, because
You were heartbroken. I
although we
remember.
had this like roller coaster relationship, I didn't get to say goodbye to her, and
Mm.
so just that in itself, because you build these connections with these students. And so we were about to start again, teacher brain, right? I'm like, oh, we're going to read this novel that I know she would love and she would be able to connect to. And she was gone for a while, but then after everything happened with her cousin, she spoke to administration and she asked to come back. And so they spoke with the teachers and we had a meeting, and so they decided to let her come back.
Love it.
And so that's where we're at. And those are the stories that we go
Those are
through.
the
Hmm.
those are the stories. And we don't have time
Thank
to really
you.
go through. And Susana chiming in from the LEC family
Hmm.
relationships are key. Thank you, because you could have easily kicked her out of your
Absolutely.
classroom. Triggers
Yeah,
are very real for the
they're very
kiddos as
real.
are coming through.
Yeah.
But yet you sat with her in that anger and even in
Yeah.
that pain. And that's what it means to be culturally responsive. And that's what
Hmm.
it means to be a teacher who genuinely cares. If there's something that I instantly saw in you, Eunice, as an early service teacher, is just your attention to the lives of your students, and
Hmm.
also how you mirror your curriculum to reflect them, to engage
Hmm.
them, and to draw them in, from Stamped to Just Mercy to so many other just culturally responsive and engaging texts and pedagogies. Like, you are just for them. And that is something that you need to continue to do. So I lift you up in this space right now, sis.
Thank
And I
you.
say, keep going, keep loving on your students, keep seeing them. Because
Hmm.
9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, guess what? Our kids in these types of environments, they want to be seen.
Oh
They
yeah.
just want to be seen. And when we
Yes.
see them, man, like it is messy. It can be like dramatic and traumatic,
Mhm.
but in the mess of it all, that's where real teaching comes in. And I know
Yeah.
you and I wouldn't trade it for the world. So moving on, right? Like the Latino population is the fastest growing population in the United States. And yet our teacher workforce across the US does not reflect that growing
Mhm.
diversity.
Yeah.
Why do you think representation matters right now in the Chicago public school system and across the nation? Why do you think
Yeah.
it matters so much in general? And quickly, why do you think it matters to your students?
I mean, it truly goes back to what you just said, students wanting to be seen, right? And so, as students ourselves, right, growing up, if all we see in books and in our textbooks are people that do not look like us, are stories that we do not relate to, are just things that are completely foreign to us, especially now in the world where it's like student everything's being fed to us, right? Social media and our phones, and it's like, our attention, we need things that are going to grab our attention, things that we're going to be able to relate to, things that we can see ourselves in. And that's why it's so
Yeah,
important for our students to see themselves in us, right? And
yeah,
have that where they can relate to their teacher, and where they know, like, okay, this, it's not like, where'd you come from, or
right,
what are you doing trying to teach me something? But when you can say, no, I know what you're going through, and if I don't know the exact thing, there's a connection there, right? There's something
right,
similar. Either, I grew up with parents that are immigrants, right? Being that first generation here in the United States, or growing up in
right,
a neighborhood where I hear the gunshots at night, just like you do. And I've experienced that. And I've experienced,
yeah,
kind of being scared walking home from school when you see something a little funny happening in the corner of the block over there. Those are real stories, real life situations that you can connect to with your students, and even just looking like them, right? That there's that instant bond, that instant connection there, where they're like, okay, well, I'll listen to what they have to say, because
right.
they have those same experiences. And I think that that's just so important. The
I love it.
students need
And
that. They need that.
yeah, and the
Mhm.
power of shared identity, right? We need more teachers like Eunice. You're
Thank
getting
you,
so much
Martin.
love in the chat. I
Thank
love
you.
it.
Thank you.
So I'm lead visionary for a nonprofit called Project 214 in honor of my
Mhm.
first class number, Room 214. And we love to highlight students and teachers that are doing incredible things. And I think I have some pictures here where we featured you, Eunice, for our featured teacher
Oh, my
segment.
classroom. Look at that.
Yes,
Truth is worth
yes,
seeing. That is a part of our essential question, essential statement.
yes,
Yeah. That was with
throwing you
just
up there.
actually. Yeah.
Yes, throwing you up there and just honoring you because you are doing some incredible work. You are in a pretty challenging zip code there, and we see you and we know you are working with our multilingual learners and with students that are in some tough spots, but they are powerful, they are resilient,
Oh
and
yeah.
you
Oh,
are creating pathways for change for them in your classroom. As we come to a close here, man, like what keeps you going? Um, what are some things that really keep you going?
I mean, honestly, not to sound cheesy or cliche, it's truly my family. I have to say that I'm truly blessed to have people in my corner, that I love dearly, that love me, that have been so supportive. Even going back to school, getting my master's, having a newborn child, or he was 1 year old at the time, and a teenager and a preteen, all this, just having supportive people in my corner, that's a huge plus that I know I'm very fortunate to have, right? Not everyone has that. And what keeps me going is just going back to, like, little Eunice, and going back to little me and knowing and
That
thinking
inner
about,
child.
right, my inner child. Yes, like who who did I need? What did I need when I was a child, right? And providing that, or at least trying to be just a little light of that for
Mm,
my students, because going back to that inner child, like there's so much that's going on within us, and we need those people in our corner, right? We need those people that see us, that care for us, and just even want to listen, and so that's definitely what keeps me going.
I love it. And we need you to keep going because we need you to stay with the babies, because we need
Yeah.
you, your tough love, your high expectations, but yet your compassionate heart. I always like to end with what I call rapid fire, just to kind of lighten up things because I know I like to go semi into the issues. Um, so rapid fires, right? This or that. You didn't know what I had on the list, but let's see
Okay.
what you come up with.
All
Some of
right.
them are pretty surface, and then some get a little deep. No wrong answer, right? It's just what you
Okay.
gravitate
Okay.
towards,
Right. Right.
first. All right, so here's the first one. The first couple are food, okay? So that's easy
Okay.
enough. All
I
right.
love food.
So tostones or tortillas?
Tortillas. Oh yeah.
Tortillas. Okay, okay.
Tortillas.
I see that. I
Definitely.
see that.
Definitely.
Even though you're married to a Puerto Rican, but we good. We good. All right, this one is going to represent your cultura del Salvador, which my children have that blood coursing through their veins. I'm a huge
Mhm.
fan of El Salvador. I've been traveling and visiting and being among the people for years. Yeah, my people. Legit, you are my people. So
Oh yeah.
pupusas or pozole?
Pupusas. I
Hands
mean,
down.
I love pozole, like on a cold winter. There's actually a pozole spot right by our house.
Uh-oh.
Oh my gosh, we love it. But man, I gotta go with the pupusas. Come on.
Pupusas, got it. We got some conflicts in the chat. Our girl said tostones,
I
and
mean, I
your
love
husband said,
tostones
what?
too. I love tostones, but like,
It's
come on.
fine. It's fine. You just never gonna get tostones fried for you again. All right. The fried
Tostones are a
plantain
very
for the
close
people who
second.
don't know.
Very, very close second. With the
All right.
mayo ketchup, oh man, you see now you got me. And I did grow up in Humboldt Park, so it's like,
It's all good. It's all good. You're gonna get in trouble afterwards, but it's
but man, I
it's
love
cool.
those. Yeah.
All right. Café con leche or espresso?
Oh, café con leche.
Right.
Oh
I mean, I kind
yeah,
of gave that one to you,
no
right? I
brainer,
kind of
no brainer.
I kind of tossed it to you. Chicago Cubs or Sox? Let's go sports. Chicago.
Chicago Cubs. I
All
mean,
day. Go Cubs,
although
go.
I'm a South Sider now, I grew up in the North Side, so
I still love my Cubbies too. Yes, yes, yes. Although Sox, we ain't mad at you either. All
No,
right.
we
So
ain't.
now let's get into super quickly like the realm of social justice. Okay. So equity or equality?
Oh, equity.
Equity. Okay.
Equity.
Equity
Yes.
across the board.
Oh
Voter
yeah.
rights or fair housing?
That's a tough one, especially when I worked in housing, when I worked in my social work world. Voter rights or fair housing? Let's go with fair housing.
Okay, fair
Although, I
housing. Yeah,
mean,
for sure, right?
yeah, but I mean,
Absolutely.
everyone deserves a roof over their head. So,
All right. EDU justice or racial justice?
EDU justice or racial justice? Dang, Sophia, these are tough. EDU
I know.
justice or racial justice? Um, let's go with racial justice, because I feel like if there's racial justice, then that's gonna align itself with EDU justice, because there's no barrier, right? No one's
I
being
love it.
stopped from getting their education because there's racial justice. So we'll go with
I
that one.
love it. Last one. Empathy or sympathy?
Ooh, empathy. I mean, although for the empathizer, right, that could be a burden, right? We talked about that earlier once, because if you really feel and if you're constantly feeling for other people, us as educators, right, then it's tough on us. But no, definitely empathy. There's nothing like being able to say me too, right? I've been
Me
there. I can
too.
empathize. I've been through it.
Mm,
I know what you're feeling, right? There's nothing like that. So
I
definitely
love that.
empathy.
I
Mhm.
love it. I feel you, sis. Great
We don't
job
need
on that
people
rapid
feeling sorry
fire.
for us, right? Like we are empowered. I just need you to know where I'm at,
Right.
right? Like you don't
I
need to feel
love it.
sorry for me, but I need you to see me. So
All right. We've got literally like 15, 20 seconds left before I go into my Sophia Speak segment. Fill in these last two blanks, sis.
okay.
I want my students to leave my classroom.
Oh wow. Feeling empowered to be authentically themselves, like be you, be you. Yes.
I love it all day. And last fill in the blank, what teachers need right now is
A break.
come
some
on,
grace, some grace, a break.
say it loud
Uh
so the people in the back can hear.
right. Like just give us a break, y'all. Like we are trying. We are trying. We need some grace shown to us. And
Mm,
like a literal break would be nice too, like a spring break happening where
right.
how much longer we got till spring break?
Help us, Lord. Help us all, Lord.
Uh-huh.
Eunice, I'm so proud of you. This was an incredible interview. Again, we see you as a third year Chicago public school teacher in the back of the yards community, working with our multilingual learners and our incredible babies in the city of Chicago. We see you, we are for you, and
Thank
we
you.
are excited to have heard your story today. You are important,
Thank
you
you.
matter. Adelante. Great job, sis.
Thank you, sis. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. I enjoyed my time. I was so nervous, but you said it. Once you're in it, right? The nerves kind of like teaching, right? Or when you have an
Right.
observation, which I actually
That's
just
it.
had one yesterday. So,
And you got your excellent marking, so we good. Love you, sis.
thank you, sis. Love you.
So thank you again, everybody, for joining us for another episode of Sophia Speaks. I always like to leave with just some commentary and some thoughts of mine. Urban ed is not for the weak or faint at heart. Teachers who work in neighborhoods that reflect some of our nation's most challenging issues, it's extremely taxing, to say the least. I will continue as my civic and social responsibility to expose the trench work, the front lines, the up close and personal, because the K through 12 space will be better for it. And these teacher soldiers, here's to praying they not just survive, but thrive another year. Here's to praying they are roused to social change, finding their way to seats at the table. And in honor of Black History Month, in the words of Shirley Chisholm, who in 1968 became the first Black woman in US Congress, once said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, you bring a folding chair. To all my EDU justice warriors, I see you, I feel you, and I am with you in the fight. Until next time, keep shining.